Today's work is going to be around carving phase 2 of the ring, which is getting a little fancier. I had my waxworking class this weekend, so I'm all set up to carve and use all the tools again. It's good to get my hands back on some wax. Do we have anybody new? Anybody new to the crew? Okay, guess not. So I can skip the usual intro, but I will post the where to find my contact info if you want to join the various sessions. And I will remind you that my next workshop is one of my favorites. It's Hollow Forms in Silver, and that is May 19th through 21st. You can take it more than once. If you take it once, you're going to get an overwhelming amount of different things to try. And if you take it a second time, you get some more advanced stuff out of it, practicing some of the more unusual forms, concave, convex, conical forms, all kinds of good stuff out of that.
Rachel,
Yeah.
will that be the necklace?
So that
picture?
that is what I use in the techniques for necklaces that you may have seen on my Instagram and so on. You're not doing a finished project necessarily.
Okay.
A lot of people get a pendant done, or maybe a pendant and a ring. It depends on your pace. What you're doing is mostly techniques, and so you choose if you're gonna just like sort of touch down on all the techniques I show you, or if you're gonna pick something and really work it all the way through. But just like in much of my other teaching, I throw an awful lot of information your way. Several of the folks on this class can attest.
Okay.
It's a great class. Great class.
Yeah, I want to take that one.
What I try to do with it is set you up for success in future uses for hollow forms. I consider the progression of fabrication to be make bezels, put caps on them to make hollow forms and make fancier hollow forms, go from there to hollow form structured clasps like box clasps, and we've got clasps where it's sliding pegs through a hollow form and so on, and then move on to boxes if you really get excited about hollow forms, hinged boxes, locket boxes, all kinds of stuff. So those are all sort of like, people get overwhelmed and go, I could never do that. Well, if you've made a bezel, it's not a huge step once you're comfortable with basic bezel structure to go on to the hollow forms. And then once you got the hollow forms down, you're golden for all the other stuff. Then it's about futzy little details on the fancier stuff, like putting on a hinge or very carefully cutting away a port for your clasps to go in. And not surprisingly, I have a clasps class later in the year too. So it's a good stepping stone for that. And then coming up after that in September will be my Bezels Less Ordinary class, which is taking some of the stuff that you might have learned along the way in this course and expanding on it, ways to make mostly traditional bezels a whole lot fancier in a hurry. So it's using filing techniques that get you effects that look like they're three-dimensional. Well, they are three-dimensional, but it looks like you built it out of layers. Adding decorative wire, just all kinds of variations on the theme, and a couple of more unusual settings that go along with that too. And then in November is the clasps class, and I haven't locked in. I always like to do at least box clasp, and in that one, because it's a 3-day, I'm going to start with a day of lots of little clasps, like fancier hook and toggles than you might make or buy. And then box clasp and one other clasp. And I haven't decided whether I'm going with the hinged clasp or whether I'm going with one of the others on the fancier side there. So I'm playing around with that still. Questions about any of those classes? Okay, registration is up and active for all of them. Let's see what else. As always, if you are not currently getting your best possible pricing at Rio Grande, use this code that I've put in chat and make sure you re-up it every 6 months. You can put more than one instructor there. It doesn't give you extra benefits, but it might, I don't know if they just start the 6-month count over again with each instructor or how that works. let's see. Today we are working on pretty much just the rest of the wax carving so that I can send it off to be cast. I'm actually hoping I can convince a friend in our guild, our local guild, to cast it for me, since to my extreme dismay, my favorite casters just closed. Anybody that took anybody that's had me talk about any of my casting, I don't know that I've actually taught a wax casting class other than the one I just taught in years at this point. But I used to go to Tito's Casting in New York, which was an absolute low tech, like you couldn't find them on the web. They wouldn't answer email. You could only talk to them on the phone or go in person. And they apparently lost their lease like a week before I was teaching my class this weekend, where I usually send people there. So if you have favorite casting houses that have done good work, send them my way in an email. I would appreciate it. I got a few names from some of my lists, but I haven't tried any of them yet, so I'm still looking. Not that I'm personally doing a whole lot of casting these days, but if you have anything. So tonight is just that carving, but then next session, which is going to be May 3rd, we are doing the final setting in chapter 6, other than when we get the casting back, and we'll do the Roman, the hammer set that we need to do for the Roman setting / True Gypsy. So we will do a faux channel setting, which is done in heavy gauge. We're creating a channel out of a U of heavy gauge metal. Why this one is faux, I'm not entirely sure why he calls this one faux, because it's the same technique as a channel setting. We're not doing it on a curve, which is a more traditional place you would see a channel set, but we're making a channel and we're setting a stone in it. So the principles are the same. And then we will probably also at least start on, if not finish, the 3 variations on setting a pearl. I'm betting we'll get through 2 of them. Pearl and or gem bead, as you prefer. It doesn't have to be a pearl. But those are, oops, thank you. Paula's face keeps popping up. That's because I have failed this spotlight myself. Like I said I would. There we go. Spotlight for everyone. Not that we don't like seeing your face, Paula. So what else? We're gonna do there's only pearl and or bead setting, as gemstone setting in that one, and that will be the end of that chapter. Chapter 6, I think. Is it chapter 6 or chapter 7? Actually, I think that's chapter 7. And then we do our final chapter and we're done. Except for any of the backlog that you guys want me to redo. So as a reminder, if there's a setting that either you think you couldn't see well enough on the videos, or that I screwed up enough that I should probably do it again, those are already on my list, that set. At least I think so. I think I have all the ones that I feel I need to do again. But if there's something you just want closer up, or that a shape that we didn't do in a specific setting, drop me a note or post and we'll make it happen. I probably am going to take a few weeks to a month off between finishing the final chapter and doing all of those settings, or I may take roughly a month off and then we'll start with once a month. I will do some of those replacement settings. I've got to look at my calendar, but it's getting kind of crowded because it's getting into show season for me. And I've got at least 4 shows this year, the first of which is next week. So I'm a little crazed already. And I am very excited to say that I got into Park City Kimball this year, which is one of the hardest shows in the country to get into. And I'm still a little bit in shock and sort of trying to figure out how the heck I'm going to make it happen.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It meant I had to cancel another show that I enjoy doing because they were too close together, but there was no way I was going to be able to do back-to-back weekends. And it means I don't get to take the Nash Quinn class that was all scheduled to do, but I will take another Nash Quinn class another day because man, his stuff is cool. Okay, any questions on past settings or on anything not specific to a setting before we go further? All right.
I'm sorry, I got in a little late because I got the wrong number, I guess.
Oh, you got
I'm rusted.
the first instead of the third? Yeah.
So where are we going to be? I know we were going to be doing the wax casting.
not the casting, the carving. I am
The
not showing
carving?
casting on screen. I don't cast, or not that kind of casting anyway. So we're going to do the detailed carving. You guys had said you were intrigued as to how I would finish off the ring that we started in the last session. So I've determined
Okay.
I'm going to do some decorative elements to it, and show you how I get it nice and cleaned up before it goes for casting. And then I'll send it out, and hopefully we can get it back fairly quickly. But it probably won't be until somewhere in between the pearl setting chapter and our final chapter, which is tension settings, is the final chapter. Tension settings is interesting. I have not done a whole lot of tension settings because silver isn't the greatest material for tension setting unless you're working really heavy. Because the whole point of a tension setting is that it has no spring back by the time you're done. It is very, very hardened, and stays clamping your gemstone into place. So yeah, anything else before I start carving again? Okay. A little bit of backstory for those that weren't here for last session. We started making a fairly traditional ring, which could have stopped here or in some equivalent like this basic ring. And we started it out of a squared off top block of ring material, of ring wax, and then carved it down to this shape by first gridding out a sort of a crosshatch on the top, and I'm doing some gridding along the sides as guidelines. Let me actually zoom in a little bit for you guys so you can really see that grid work. See the grid that I've got laid out that was also on the top when we were cutting this. When we did the cut, our goal was to make a seat with a hole beneath it. So we did all of that last time, creating a level seat cut in with a combination of burrs and carving tools. And we did a little shaping to the top from the flat surface. Our goal with this setting is to have a bit of a thick border around it because we're going to be hammering just outside of that border, right along here. Okay. I don't know if that's showing well enough, the black marks. But basically what's going to happen is we're going to be, if we looked at it from a side view where our stone sits in here. All right, there's our stone. What we're doing is we're hammering down in here so that it puts a little channel, not channel, but divot kind of thing, which pushes the rest of the material bumping up against the stone. So it's going to be hammer set with almost, this is one of the settings where we almost hit straight up and down. And when we push that all the way around, by the time we're done, if we were to look at it from the top view, we would have a little bit of a push down channel, not a huge amount, doesn't have to be much, running all the way around the stone. And then we'll have, of course, whatever shape we end up with for the carving outside of that. Okay. So that's as far as we got last time. And I could just have it I could scrape off the excess marks and finish it off a little bit and just have it cast this way. This is not a ring I would personally wear, nor one that I care for the design of. And you guys were enthusiastic to see what the finishing steps are and what additional work I would do to it. So I'm going to do a little design playing around with these sides and building in some inset framework. A fairly traditional classic men's ring is going to have some kind of top stone and often some detailed stone set in the side. A lot of times it'll be the bead setting that we did in the earlier chapter, and there might be a series of diamonds bead set up against each other in some kind of a frame here. I'm gonna just count on this nice giant stone we've got as the only stone. So I've decided I'm gonna do something sort of vine-like along it. And depending on how it goes, I may actually put some negative space, cutting away all the wax, or I may just do the carving on the side wall. Now, another thing about this kind of jewelry is oftentimes there will be a space built in, and then in another metal, they'll cast an element that fits inside of it. and set that in. So for example, we might do the ring in silver, but then create a gold leaf work that we cast that fits just there, or we might fabricate it and put it in the position that we want. You can mix and match. It's not an all or nothing deal. And some of the tools that we're going to be using today, last time we mostly used calipers and dividers to measure things out, and we used some cutting burrs that we were using, barrel burrs and things like that, to take material away. We used an X-Acto knife for a lot of it. A lot of my rough cut I do with an X-Acto knife, although there are special tools you can use. This time we're going to do a little bit more. We're going to use a torch or a lamp rather, which just has alcohol in it to burn. And we're going to use this heat tool. Let me zoom back out so you can see the heat tool. This is one brand of heating tool. There are many others. And this is one that the dental industry created for us. We have a lot of overlap. If you've ever had a tooth, a cap built or anything like that, they're using the same kind of waxes and the same kind of carving tools that we have if they're doing it by hand. Nowadays, you're getting more and more that are printed to the 3D scans, but there's still old school carving and casting. So we're going to use this particular brand that I have because I have a couple of them and I like the tips on it. Other machines that you find are a little cheaper than this, but you don't have quite the fine touch of the tips. They tend to be a little coarser or thicker tip and don't come in as many shapes as this system has. But that said, its weakness is how wussy this cord is and how easily it breaks and how hot it gets on the tips. They burn out a little bit faster than I'd like. The other thing that you can use is cheap. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I've never seen that kind of machine. Is it old or is it new?
So Kerr has been around for a long time. This model is probably, well, 10 or 12 years old. There are newer Kerrs. They're a little boxier and they come sort of bright blue and gray. But this is like standard industry model that your dentist might have. And they're often cheapest directly from the manufacturer, although you can sometimes find sales on them elsewhere. The expensive part of these, so the machine itself is probably $300, give or take. I haven't priced it in a while, but these are the bloody expensive things. Each of the tips is $65 to $95 or more, depending on the tip these days. And so it gets pricey. They also come, this also has a lot finer temperature control, which is one of the reasons I like it. And they do have a foot pedal. I have never found a reason to use a foot pedal with this machine. I have them. They're still in their original plastic box, plastic wrapping box. The other thing is, next time you go to your dentist, if you want to get involved in waxworking, ask them for their used tools. They will have sterilized them before they're done with them, or they can sterilize. They should sterilize them for you, but they can only use them for so long in actual teeth. And these are literally dental picks in many cases. You can also buy wax tools, but know that you're just buying fancy dental tools. And so the scrapers that they use on your teeth and so on, they're getting a little bit rarer at the dentist because a lot of times these days they're using water pick style cleanings. So they're using fewer variations of these tools, but man, there's some great ones. And get extras because you can always, like we modify our other tools, you can always modify the profiles of the tip. But I'm going to show you a few of the shapes that I like to use the most. And then I'll show you the fancy version of wax tools. Let's see. So sharp and pokey and bent. And this just has the same kind of thing on either end. I think one of these is a little thicker point than the other. Scrapey with a little bend in it. I really love it when there's a little bend. I don't like so much the straight on scraping tools, but I really like having a bit of control while still being able to see it. Oops, I'm out of frame, aren't I? Where's my frame? There we go. Scrapey, and a little bit of point to it so that I can still really see what I'm working on. Different kind of scrapey. I would prefer this one a little bent downward, just like the first one was, but this does some good taking away and smoothing out of material. Think of them as a combination of burnisher and polisher. Here's a little bitty version. I use this one a lot for getting into the detailed corners. And this one is sort of a rounded paddle that gives you a different curve. So I could get an undercut if I wanted to. I can work around something. I don't much use the opposite end on this one. That doesn't do much for me. So those are some of the ones I might go to on a regular basis. Or I might use my unbelievably expensive and really worth buying, but only after you've already gotten comfortable with your basic tools. Wolf Tools. Kate Wolf, who is an amazing instructor. If you ever want to learn wax carving, she is the absolute best. If you want to learn wax carving on a lathe, she's unbeaten. She's just amazing at what she does. And these tools are designed specifically for that work. There's a whole set of them, and she has several different sets. So you'll see that it's like a selection of sizes and different variations within the dimensions of any given shape. But again, I tend to use a couple of the flat tools. Actually, I could pull two of the same tool somehow. Scrapey tools. So this has a triangular pointy shape, but also the edges of the triangle are cutting. I really like the angled curve. These look like sort of some kind of golf club variant to me, but this gets really beautiful soft shapes. And then this one is super cool. This one, because it takes a bend and you can smooth out the walls of something upright that you've carved, getting a really good clean line. I may have used that one a little bit when we did the finishing on this. I can't remember. So those are some of the fancier tools. And then also there are drill bits, and the drill bits, the burrs are specific to waxworking, meaning you don't want to use your everyday metal bits, because you'll see these are considerably coarser. They do come in other sizes. I've just got a few. But they're considerably coarser so that they don't get jammed up with the wax, right? Because this isn't 100% wax, it's a wax plastic blend. And so we're going to be working with the combination of cutting away. I may use the burrs for a little bit of divoting or something like that, but mostly I'm going to be doing hand carving on this. Questions about any of those tools? Okay. The other thing that we'll be using is a set of different waxes. There's some of this green wax, which is the same material as this. In case I break something, I can do repairs with this. Kate has also made these wonderful finishing waxes, and they're not for full-scale forming, but like if I get too deep of a gouge, I can put a little tiny bit in there and repair it. Or if I want to put tiny beading on it in wax before I cast it, I can do that. She has a few different waxes. She has one called relief wax and one called touch-up wax. I don't use the touch-up wax much because relief wax is so good that that's my go-to. And we might end up using some of the soft waxes for a little detail, but I think probably not. Again, we'll also use the heat on occasion, because a combination of hand carving while it's cold and heated carving gets a nice clean effect in places. And we'll use this when it gets down to some of the fine detail I might put on my vines, this being the Kerr tool that I've left out of sight right now. That I guess that is showing a little bit. I think I've covered the majority of them. I think we've sized this well enough that we're not going to need to use the carver that we used last time, which helps us take material out, but I may end up using it for some of my finishing. One of the things I like about this is that the giant blade makes it easy to scrape down a curve, so I can take material away. We're also going to end up finishing with some special sandpaper. And I'm glad my mother is on, at least she was a few minutes ago, because one of the things that I use to finish this is my grandmother, her mother's silk stockings. So it doesn't have to be silk, but if you happen to have silk stockings, those are even better because they're super fine material and they don't catch as much. Old nylon stockings work fine as well, but a finish sanding that buffs out the last of it is one of the final steps we do after we've done all of our other cleanup. So this is a tiny scrap of, I got a few of her silk stockings that were far beyond any wearable condition, or I'd have kept them for that. And so I get to think of her whenever I do the carving work, the wax work. anything else we're going to use? So I'm not using, for what I'm doing, I'm not using wax files, but I do want you to know about them. They too, like the burrs, are much coarser. They're actually kind of like torture device spiky. So remember that the saw blades that we used last time to cut the wax, they had a sort of a twisted toothiness. These do too. They take material down very, very fast and very rough. So I tend to use them almost not at all, except for really working in deep spaces that I need to get material away from. I think I have covered the tools I expect to use. Oh, this is wallboard sandpaper, which only comes in a few different grits, but is the best for sanding down wax. Because if it clogs, you can clear it up. Let me grab my beverage because I am super parched from all the allergy stuff today. And then we will begin. So first thing I want to do is mark out for myself a rough pattern. And I'm thinking that I'm going to go with something viney climbing up and through these little segments and maybe around, so that I'll have a leaf towards the top and a leaf down at the bottom, maybe a leaf in this corner, and something branching off of it into this. That doesn't look so good. I'm not going to do that last one. Looping around. Something along those lines. So I'm just using my grid as a proportion marker to get it set up. And then I'm going to do some kind of winding vine to the other side. I'll probably have to redraw this a couple times because while Sharpie mark goes down easily, it also wipes off easily. Let's see what I did there. So I'm just laying out some rough ideas. To give myself a sense of what I want to do. And in order to make that really pop, I think I'm going to frame it a little bit. Which means that I'm going to take down material before I actually get to the carving of the leaves. And let's see, what do I want to use for that? So I'm going to just work my existing lines. And take away materials. So this is hard wax tends to be mostly subtractive work, whereas soft wax is more additive. So in doing this, what I'm doing is giving myself an outline that I'm then going to work down to the same level, oops, except for when I go across my pattern, I'm going to go down to a certain level, leaving behind enough material to carve my leaves out of and my vine. And this could be a series of different tools that could work for me. I'm going to play around a little bit to see which ones I'm feeling do the job. That is not sharp enough. frame my leaves a little better so that I can continue to follow their line. This blade is not in the assembly. There we go. I can always add material back if I take it away, but it is a pain in the butt to get a clean match to the existing work. So we try to not take too much away at the outset. I think I'm definitely going to want to do some negative space as I do this. So cutting all the way through in a little bit. And just like with anything dimensional, you're going to want to be cognizant of what comes up to the foreground and what goes down to the back. So I'm going to take away only the exterior areas so that I'm leaving myself plenty of material to get more depth into the design. And if I were doing this as a specific custom ring for someone, I might have done more careful drawing layout and given them sketches and said, hey, how do you like this layout? You want more leaves, fewer leaves, you want a different kind of vine, all those sorts of things. My frame on this side a little bit clearer. One of the most challenging things in doing carving is making sure that if you're trying to get something that matches on both sides, you'll find that one side or the other is easier for you to carve. So, you know, your handedness might help you more than on one direction than on the other. So it's very, very hard to make a perfect match, but those grids that I hate doing, you guys know how much I hate layout and math and all that good stuff, but man, they make a difference in how laid out and neat your pattern is when you're working it.
Rachel,
Yeah.
all too often your left fingers are blocking the view from the camera.
So unfortunately, I'm going to have to, there's not much I can do about it in order to hold this right. But I can stop at various times and show you guys the progress I've made.
Okay.
So let me zoom in. Because I actually have discovered that I need those fingers to hold things where I need them to go. Let's see.
Is that a fact?
It is. I just haven't been able to get away from using them. All right, so this is really coarse right now, but you can see I'm starting to frame, and then I'm starting to create the channels down the back of the ring that are going to become the vine, making it a little wobbly like a vine might be. On this side, I've only just started to create the channels around it, and I'm about to put that leaf motif back in to where inside of this framing. So that's where we're headed for the first pass. And this waxworking gets, just like a lot of bench work, gets ugly before it gets beautiful. There's a lot of coarse, rough takeaway. Get some vines and leaves. It is a little bit like watching paint dry, seeing these little chips go. And it's a little bit more fun to do than it is to watch. But one of the things that I say to students in this process is you'll know you're getting there when it starts to become kind of meditative as you work your way on this, because it definitely, it's easy to want to rush it, but the littler amounts of material you take away at a time, the more controlled your pattern will be and the more delicate. And so it's just kind of like little mouse nibbles at the wax. Right now, it's starting to look like the outline of a palm tree, which is not at all what I'm going for. Working the curves is a lot harder than working the straightaways. If you're Portland local, one of my favorite wax carvers in the area, who is also a teacher, is a guy named Thomas Tietze, Tietze. And he primarily does fish, especially salmon and trout, as what he carves, and he does them with intricate gold details and pearls set in them and gemstones for eyes and so on. He also does octopi and things along that line, but mostly aquatic stuff. He's also one of the nicest people you'll ever meet, and so taking a class from him is a delight. And he is available for both private instruction and classes at times that he schedules in various places. I don't know if he does any online teaching, but if you're local, you can come see him and his work at the Oregon Convention Center and say hi to me while you're there, because we're going to both be at the gathering of the guilds next weekend. Is it next weekend? Not this coming weekend, but the weekend after. One of my favorite pieces of his, he does, I think he calls it a ghost salmon, which is half of the body shows the skeletal form, and then the rest of the head of it primarily, and a little bit of the tail shows the fully fleshed out scaled fish. And it's just an amazing piece. He's done a series of them. Okay, so I'm going to pause there and once again zoom in for some of the rough cut. So there we're getting very, very rough. And a little bit of vine on the back and a little bit of rough here. And at this point, what I'm going to do is decide what, if any, space I'm cutting all the way through. And we have some drills that look a lot like pearl reamers. They may even dual purpose, but they act as just a little flexible drill to kind of start the hole. Or you can take one of the picks and do it. In fact, this may actually be my pearl reamer, because that looks like it's a little bit too fine. No, maybe this is the one that was working for me the other day. Yeah, one of them's a little heavier duty than the other. And I'm just drilling a basic hole where I'm going to be piercing it. And this works a lot like any other negative space work. You have to get a starting point and either, if you can, saw away material around it or file away material. or gouge it with the tools that you have. And in this case, what I'm going to do is find my straight pick and do a little gouging on that hole that I just created. You have to be careful with this because it's easy to get to this point and snap your wax, in which case you need to do a repair. So right now my mission is just to get a starting hole that I can work a little bit out from there and take away material. I could do this with any number of tools. I could use the small ball burrs to get material away. I can just twist down with this blade. Just gonna get me a small spot that I want to get out. And then the tough part is the finessing of the space that you're trying to get clear. Trying to keep my fingers out of view, but also not stab myself as I go through this. I have a fondness for my unstabbed fingers. I do have to be somewhat conscious of where the stone is going to be, in that I don't necessarily want to poke through above that line. Oops, above that line. Thankfully, the cuts that I'm making are well below it. So you'll see that I'm taking material away just below where the stone is going to rest. The other advantage of doing some of this negative space work is it makes for a much lighter and therefore cheaper to cast ring, but also potentially more comfortable. No matter what, we're going to end up cleaning some material out of the inside back of the ring, just below where the stone sits. But you will see that just adding a little bit of negative space already starts to add some interest to this design. Zoom in again for you. Yep, wrong way. Come on, focus. Focus, there we go. So already by adding that negative space, we're changing the shape of what's presenting compared to the other side that I haven't done that to yet, right? So I've got interesting texture starting here and lift, and then I've got, bam, suddenly the pattern is emphasized, right? And we haven't even gotten to the fine detail. We're just doing the structural stuff. Questions so far? Not easily able to see chat when I'm doing this part of it.
Have you consider either, I mean, can you first of all use like a bobber or the saw blade that you showed us, or
Yep, as long as the ball burr is one of those wax burr versions, not you want a really coarse burr. Hang on, my Zoom is behaving badly on my end. Let me get some stuff out of my way. There we go. So yes, I have both large and small wax burrs. The smallest I have is 1.7 ml, but even that is a very coarse. Where am I? It's not going to focus enough for that, is it? You can sort of see how chompy it is. way coarser than your average metal burr, because otherwise it'll clog. So I could be doing a little bit of taking out of that. If I had really tiny barrel burrs, I'd probably be using those, but I only have really gigantic ones. But you can even get setting burrs that are nice and coarse. These are all, not surprisingly, Kate Wolf products, but you can get them from Rio Grande. Just look for wax carving burrs and it should pop up, assuming their search engines are working well these days, which they aren't always. So I'm going to do the same exercise on the other side. Think of the tools I've tried today, the best to start it was my little straight pick. There's my stupid pick. No, maybe not. Maybe I'll go with this. And this is the wax working is one that I like because it's a fairly low entry point way to get into metalsmithing. In that you don't have to have a full studio. You could do this sitting at home in front of the television with a handful of less expensive tools. It's easy to go up in price and get fancier tools, but right out of the gate, some of the tools I recommend when you're just starting out include a basic wood carving set from like Dick Blick or something like that. You can get a set of about 5 or 6 tools for $12 or something like that. They're just wooden handled, big coarse carving tools. And it's a great way to get started and then get those dental tools. You don't have to have the fancy waxer tools right out of the gate. But it will quickly become apparent that you want to have something. There's a super inexpensive handheld tool called Max Wax. Let me get zoomed back out again. Wrong way. Max Wax pen that acts similarly to the big Kerr Waxer, but is less easy to control. However, it's only $30 or something and it runs on batteries. So for example, I used to do a lot of my wax working when I was sitting around in campgrounds, and I would bring the battery powered heat tool because I wouldn't always be guaranteed of having power at the campsite. So it lets you do that work, at least in the coarsest form, without the expensive tools. So now I'm starting to enhance the negative space and carve away more and more. I'm still leaving a very coarse outline of my leaves because I want to have as much material as possible to actually shape and form those down the road. But the more I work on this, the more those will take form that we can see. The only downside of doing this sitting in your living room is if you have pets. This wax stuff is staticky beyond measure. So your pets will go around with little bits of green wax or whatever color you're using, floating all around, sticking to their fur. It's not toxic, so it's, you know, if they eat it, it's not happy making for their tummies, but it's not poisonous or anything. I'm gonna switch my blade because I don't think I've changed the blade on this in a while, and they get really gunked up over time with the wax working. So it never hurts to get a fresh blade. I buy the blades in the 100 pack because then I don't have to think too much if I decide I need a fresh one.
From Amazon?
I think I probably got these at like Lowe's or something. But you can certainly get them in the 100-pack from Amazon. When you get 100 at a time and you don't do a lot of wax working, you have them around for years. So I probably bought this 100-pack like 5-6 years ago. I think I've used a third of them. It is when you're carving with the blades, just an X-Acto, it becomes a little easy to get overzealous in your cutaway. And if you try to chip too much out with one scrape of the knife, its tendency is to chip a block of wax off. So it's coarse but effective is the way I'd put it. And so I'm, again, doing most of my rough work with this. And then I'll come back in and use the finer, higher quality tools for something in more detail.
I was once hired at the Park District to teach just the bare basics of a jewelry class, which they wanted the kids to make a ring, and then the Park District paid for. It was like a summer program for the kids,
Nice.
and they all had X-Acto blades
Yeah.
because it was bare bones. But these were 10 and 11-year-olds and 13-year-olds. I'm like, if you cut yourself, I'm not responsible. So you have to be very careful. And they ended up doing some really cool little things,
Nice.
And
I
then one
started
kid-
when I was 8. I'm a fan of kids learning how to use the tools correctly.
Okay, there you go. And one of the kids came back and said, my mom took the ring.
Oh, good.
It's like, for me though. I'm like, all right.
Okay, so I'm liking one side of this much better than the other. Oops, zooming in. Come on, focus. There we go. Maybe. It's not quite focused. Back out. Oh, there we go. So this side is starting to really come together. It's got a nice pattern that sort of emphasizes the leaf, the vine behind it. This side is a little snugger on here, so I didn't get 4 negative spaces. So I need to either rework the leaf a little bit and open up some stuff here, or I'm not sure what. I may leave it because this is really an exercise in play. And then now I can start to think about what am I going to actually shape these leaves into? How are they going to end up looking? And so for this, I'm going to actually do a little cleanup of the work first so I can see my forms a little better, which means I'm going to light up my alcohol torch. Scooch it open a little bit more. I'm not a huge fan of using alcohol on my bench if I can help it. And I know a lot of people use an alcohol borax mix for fire scale, but that can easily spill and it's not a flame that shows very well. So it's easy. I never have it on the bench when I'm teaching beginners, because if they knock into it, they may not realize they've set their bench on fire. So all of the tools I've been carving with can also be heated and carved. There will be some burn off from whatever wax is on there. You got to be careful because it acts a lot more quickly and not as controlled because it's melting stuff.
Can you move your hand? Yeah, there you go. That's
Get a little bit zoomed out because it's hard for me to stay in position. So I'm heating and doing sort of controlled reshaping of some of the leafy bits to start making them a little more dimensional and a little smoother. And I'm cleaning up some of what I've carved away with the rough. And I think I'm going to also do my channels around the vine. And part of this phase will be taking some of the vine down below the height of the leaf I've got above it to start adding in the dimensionality. And for perspective, on a ring this size and with this kind of detail, I'd probably spend 6 to 10 hours doing this instead of the somewhat sped up version that I'm doing for you guys.
How do you feel about the whole AutoCAD thing now, where you just give them a sketch and they pretty much just put it in the system and the wax comes out?
So I have mixed feelings about it, mostly not around using the technology, but mostly around the fact that it means that people that don't actually have an understanding of the fundamental need of certain structure in designs are designing jewelry that looks cool, but isn't as wearable or durable as it would be if it was somebody who had bench experience. So I'm not, there's new tools all the time, we're using fire that is coming from acetylene gases instead of from a pipe that's connected to our charcoal fire pit. So technology changes. Metal clay is one of the few totally new innovations in jewelry in hundreds and hundreds of years, if not thousands. So it's just a new technology. Use what you got. There's a whole different art form to CAD work, though, than to designing in dimensional form, either on wax or on, in fabricated work.
I've never, I mean, I did it in terms of like when I designed my wedding ring, I carved and actually I fabricated it in sterling silver, and I took it to a jeweler who did the AutoCAD and for sort of kind of designed it so that the diamond can fit in it
Nice.
and lay right correctly and all of that. And I was pretty happy with it, but I was just like, I said to her, now I'm giving you, the model, because I did it all in silver. I just want
Yep.
this to be in gold. And I don't like yellow gold per se. I like white gold. So they put that mixture on it where they put the platinum on top and they coat it, I guess. I'm not
Yeah.
sure. And it was like, I don't know, it was like a good and bad experience in the sense that it took me forever to fabricate this, to make it how I wanted it.
Yeah.
But I knew that I couldn't do it if I was going to cast it in gold and then put the diamond in it and all of that.
Yeah. So you can cast off of fabricated models. So if they recarved it, it may have been a design that really called for it, but you could have literally had a mold taken of what you built, and they could work off of that. Without knowing the specifics of your design, I can't say whether I would have recommended one or the other, but it is possible to, like, I've done projects. I did something called a guardian bell for a charitable event. Motorcyclists who were riding for St. Jude. Was it St. Jude? It was one of the children's cancer charities that they were riding for. And so motorcyclists have a thing. It's alternately called either a guardian bell or an idiot's bell or a fool's bell. And they're only supposed to be gifted to motorcyclists. And this organization wanted a bell designed so that they could give a thank you to all the riders that did the work. And I manufactured it in silver and had that molded and cast in pewter because they wanted a price point that wasn't silver. So don't limit yourself. You can actually get your castings, you can get recurring product from something that you've fabricated at your bench.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. The whole one of a kind is wonderful, but the prices can be up there. And then some
Right.
people don't care. They don't care. I mean, like, oh, it's like you tell them it's a one of a kind and some appreciate it and some of them don't.
Right.
So it's like, if you can make the mold and just recast it, that's wonderful. But I don't know. It's just for me, it's ethics. And it's like, I don't know, like for you fabricate your pieces.
Yep, I do a lot of fabrication. I used to do the waxworking, but first of all, those lines weren't selling as well. And second of all, I like to actually be the one making it. And I was just not in a place to do casting as a regular. I don't have the interest to do casting, but I also didn't have the equipment, safety equipment in particular. It's just, to me, the cool part is the design and initial creation. I don't get much out of recurring production. Like it doesn't do, there's nothing but manufacturing for me when I get down to the actual casting.
Yeah, that's why the whole thing of wholesale, it's like, unless you're so successful that you have people working for you and, just because of the whole production end of it.
Yep. I'm trying to get to a point where you guys will be able to really see the distinction in the next level of detail. It's going to be a little bit longer. Because what I'm starting to do now is really work the 3D aspect of the wax. So taking the vine behind down a little lower, having points where the leaves meet, come down to the vine. But it's all sort of just starting out as coarse work. C-O-A-R-S-E, not C-O-U-R-S-E. So rough work. And then finessing it a little bit at a time. And the nice thing about a big chunk of wax is that it has a lot of opportunity for you to build the textural stuff into it. As opposed to a thin little band of metal or a thinner wax block. I'm going to do a quick pass just to start cleaning it up a little bit more. What I'm doing is sort of heating off the little wax bits that are scrapey and left around the edges. This is really something you traditionally only do at the end, but you guys will be able to see the pattern a little better if I do a step of it now. So we're starting to get depth to the cut. As I shape around the leaves and start to take down the vine a little bit more. All the way around. Here's my center. There we go. So you
Yeah, I
can
like
start
how
to
you
see the
introduced the
form.
bottom. I'm sorry.
Say again?
I said I like how you're carving the bottom.
Yeah, I've got to figure out how much of the band I actually want to leave, because I'm not liking having quite so much width on the outside edges, so I may take a little more off. But that's sort of the joy of discovery on this. And I think I'm gonna switch to one of my other carving tools. I want to get a little more curved of a tool. Oops, I'm now out of frame again. So I'm switching from the square to a little bit round to see whether I can get some shape out of it. I may go back to the square. This one's not quite where I want it to be. That's good for my channels. So already stylistically, just by taking material away and doing this not neatly balanced sort of pattern to it, this piece becomes more interesting to me as an artist. Again, I'm not much of a boxy but good kind of designer. I like mismatches. I like not having everything symmetrical. I like negative space that surprises. And I have a whole lot of extra material here. I can work until I can see light through the other side. It does not have to be as thick as I started it with. That's why I left myself that material, to give myself the leeway to take more away. But by the time I'm done, again, I want to get my casting weight down, especially if I'm doing this in gold. It could really add to the cost without adding a whole lot of benefit. But I don't want to take all the behind material away until I've really worked my design to what I'm happy with. I think I'm going to take a little more away from that side because it's bugging me. So I was playing around with one little leafy bit on the base, and I'm not liking how that's ending up. So I think I'm going to do a little bit of repair work, which will let you see what I use the per waxer for. Get that up to temperature. Take a moment to heat up.
I'm wondering if wood burning tool will be the same like a wax thing.
So one of my students said that they had had some success modifying a wood burning tool, and then just fine tuning some of the tips that come with it. I haven't tried it myself, but he brought in a pretty fancy looking kit. It's much cheaper than one of these waxers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's worth a shot. I know there's YouTube videos on how you can modify a traditional soldering iron to become a heat tool for wax. For me, it's all about having these really fine tips though.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to do a repair on this piece where I took away the leaf that I don't want taken away. And to do that, I do additive work with some material that I have sitting around, some scrap material that I have sitting here. So I'm just going to get enough balled up and heated onto my tip that I can then get it to sort of goop where I want it to go. And with soft wax, just getting this hot enough to get to that flow state would be enough. But with hard wax, I'm going to have to actually do a reconnection sort of weld of my material, which I'll show you in just a sec. So you see I've built up a layer. I also need to make sure that the material underneath it gets melted enough to sort of molecularly bond, not just rest on top of, or underneath rather. So I've got to push through into my cold wax. This temperature needs to go up a little higher than I've got it.
And there's something meditative about it.
Yep.
Just,
So what I'm doing is I'm poking through into the cold wax, and then I slowly draw the hot tip back out so that it doesn't create a bubble behind. Because it, just like when you solder something and then reflow it, it gets those sort of pockets. The same thing can happen in the wax, in essence.
so a pocket meaning air?
Yeah, and you don't want air, especially if you're not molding what you work on, because it'll create a point that it could either not fill or explode when it's cast. So air bubbles basically are a bad thing. Now that I've got the repair, I can take away just the top layers, carve it back down to shape. Trying not to carve back too much. And actually, I'm going to see, I have an air bubble in here that I didn't catch. So I'm going to show you guys and see if you can see it. My fingernail will be pointing at it. Too far. So you see the little white dot, not the chip that's right at the end, but this white dot right where my fingernail is pointing. That is a pocket in the wax that I need to take care of or carve past. In this case, I'm going to try and take care of it by poking my heat device in and slowly drawing out. If that doesn't do it, I have to add some wax. In this case, it looks like I need to add some.
Oh, Rachel, move it up, move it up, move it up.
Oh, I'm too close, aren't I? Hang on.
Darn, I wanted to see that part.
I haven't finished. You're still safe. So I'm just taking bits of wax in screen and I'm blobbing it on there, and then I'm doing that slow poke in, and the important part is the slow draw out. There's still a little bubble, but it's above where I was before. So that technique, that if you need to practice, it's for repairs, it's for connecting things, is pushing in. Here, I'll close, I can zoom in enough and control it here when I'm not looking at a specific spot. Come on. So my technique is a push in until I'm in the material, and then slow draw out. You'll know you're doing it right if you don't get a pocket, a pock mark where you pulled it back out. I got a little pock mark on that because I didn't get it in enough. There we go. So in and slow draw back out. Okay, that is when you're connecting two pieces of hard wax, you are making those solder joints. Think of them as your tack welding first, and then you're going in and you're completing the solder, getting the molecular level pieces of the two parts of wax to get molecularly bonded, like a full good solder is going to do. Okay. And let's see, did that take care of this one? So get rid of the extra wax. Yep, that took care of my bubble. Okay. Let me pop back for a second just to do the torch melt and get it nice and clean. Looks pretty good. So let that cool enough that I can carve it again. So I'll work on another area while I'm waiting. Actually, I'm at the point where I want to start digging a little bit of wax away from behind the ring, because what I've got here is probably 3 millimeters thickness on this diagonal. And so I'm going to take some material away because I now have a confident outline of where, where I'm taking material away from. And this one gets a little tricky because this is using those angle carvers and digging material away. It doesn't have to be terribly neat at first, because really it's just to get material out of there. But you do have to make sure you don't go through to your pattern. And this is where we're going to judge whether we've got enough away by starting to see the light through. And every scrape you do in this stage of it is money you're not spending on casting metal. So while you want it to look nice by the time it's done, just think of this as lightening both the piece and the cost. And I would do this stage, if you're adding any delicate elements back in, you know, little prongs or anything like that, you need to do this well in advance of that. It's easy to chip pieces off of the front of your work if you don't. So see how I'm just starting to dig in and take meat away from behind? I'm doing it all the way up the arms of the, or the body of the shank and the body. I'm trying to take material away. And I have to remember to stay slowed down on this one because it's easy to chip and it gets easier the thinner you get. And I want to be careful not to take away material from what is supposed to be my seat. This is another area where I could pull out a ball burr and do a little work, and I think I might do that in a minute. I just need to give myself a guiding channel for what I'm going to be burring out. All right, let me zoom in and show you where we're headed with this. Oop, wrong way. I really am going to get that zoomed down one of these days. So see how I'm starting to dig in channels for it? And if you look at, if we look at different sides of this, you can start to see lighter material. So you can see how I'm getting lines, it's not if my fingers are in the way, lines of lighter material. That's where it's starting to get to the thinness I want for casting. Okay, but when we look at the back, there's still dark all the way around the what is the top of the piece. And so we have to be careful and get more out if possible, because I should really have light showing through all of this area if I do it well. So back to detailed digging out. Yeah, this is just narrow enough that I'm not sure my ball burrs are going to be a good idea. I think I'm going to keep doing this one by hand. I had an instructor whose teaching method was one she had picked up in Italy, where she trains. And when you were learning how to do waxes, especially hard waxes, at some point she wanted to break your piece just to make you learn how to repair it. Thankfully, I managed to convince her not to do that. You break enough on your own. I don't need an extra broken piece just to give me that challenge. I understand the intent behind what she was doing, but didn't appreciate that lots of work going into it would then be wasted.
That
So
could
the
be
corners
trauma.
of my piece in particular are thick. So I'm trying to get in a little further to those to get it thinned out. I don't want to go, I'm not going to go super duper thin under where we're going to be pressing for stone setting. I'm just going to get the beginning of a hint of the light behind it. And I'm trying to mostly avoid taking too much away from the area that I haven't finished detailing. Just trying to thin it a little bit. Keep in mind that if you thin in the wrong places, you'll be changing the size of the ring that you've already set up. So cautious of that as you go. One little nubbin that doesn't want to come out on one side. There we go. And I wish I had had this carve out the back business ingrained in me much earlier. Because I have made some very heavy pieces in the past. Also why I always get quoted on my casting before I cast it, because I made that mistake once. When I had a sort of scarab-like box that I had cast. And I had 6 of them done for a theatrical prop. And $860 later, when I got the bill, I was not a happy camper.
Which means you didn't pay yourself anything, right?
Oh, that was not, it was even worse than that. I wasn't getting paid for that job at all. It was a labor of love. I was paying out of pocket for a theatrical prop.
Oh, well. You
So
learn
at
from
this-
your experience.
Say again?
So at this point, Rachel, can you guesstimate how many grams?
So
you're going-
I could actually weigh it, because
Uh-huh.
that's a good way to judge it and get a conversion rate. I'm going to be taking this down further in small ways. So,
I meant it, even in your own mind with your experience.
oh God, no, that's what
Okay.
scanning for. So let me see if I can get light behind this. No, I still got a little bit more to go on the top. We're starting to see light here. It's not showing well on this camera, the detail that we're doing. Let's see if you can zoom in. So you can start to see that I'm getting a little bit lighter in my edges, but I still have chunks of material in these corners that I think I want to take down. And then we'll go back to the fine detailing.
So when you weigh it, is it the same standard wax formula? Like,
So there's a formula for each metal, and you're only going to get a rough estimation. There are charts all over the internet that you can look at for that. So for example, 18 karat is going to be a different conversion rate than 14 karat, and even white gold versus yellow gold changes it. And it's just a grams conversion. You find the gram weight of the wax, and you'll get multiply it by the right formula, and you'll get a ballpark estimate.
So when you put the wax on the scale, you put it on gram.
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, and you put it on whatever measurement your math is doing for you. Meaning if your chart says convert in grams, you convert in grams. But I don't know that I've ever seen a chart that was anything other than grams. Maybe there's a troy ounces one out there for gold, but
Because I have the formula where you have wax times 10.31 equals sterling silver.
okay. I don't have my charts in front of me. That's one of those things I go back to all the time.
I've had this forever
Yeah,
and I've never used it. But it would be nice to know how to use it.
yeah. If it's in grams, then you convert. You do the multiplier by the gram weight. So I'm just using the tip from the waxer to smooth some of my cutaways. I was seeing that I was going through kind of roughly on the other side.
Can you zoom out a little or move everything to your right?
Oh, yes. Nope, other way. I assume you meant zoom
That's-
out so you could see me. Is that good?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So I'm using this sort of as a burnisher heat device right now, just trying to smooth some of my rougher edges where I've been cutting. And then I'll go back in and start putting fine detail in my vine and my leaves. Oops, I still have to clean away the excess material that I rebuilt. That's why I did that. So I could get this out here. My errant leaf is now gone. Build it back in. Let's use it. So I could choose to put some kind of pattern on the outer wide sides too, if I wanted to. If I had more time, I probably would. It's a big blank slate right now. Or I could plan to set tiny little diamonds in the corners, make it fancy. Not that diamonds go terribly well with the agate stone we've been designing this for, but I could do it if I wanted to. All right, so I'm going to start doing a little bit more detailing and find some of my finer tools. Get some carving into the leaves. Make some of the veining. And this is where my proclivity for coursework versus a master carver is going to put, like, they're going to be leaves so well carved that they're going to look real. Whereas mine are sort of, I want to say caricatures because that feels very negative. They're sort of rough models of leaves. I'm looking for some basic veining. I'm going to try to get some depth in them. That one into leafier. And there are people that will, for example, carve out of wax your favorite pet dog. And it looks, by God, like your favorite pet dog when they're done. That is not in my wheelhouse. I have not practiced waxwork enough to get anywhere near where I need to be for that kind of carving. And there are limits to what a casting will pick up depending on the type of casting you're doing. But most casting techniques, except for like Delft clay and so on, will pick up if you've left a fingerprint on your wax. That's how finely detailed you can make it. But it's not, what you're not seeing when I go off screen is me just running the wax over the heat to get rid of some of the grubbier scraps, so I can see my pattern a little better. And then I'm going to do some detail work. So Kate has come out with a new micro set that I'm now coveting, having finally seen it in person this weekend. Somebody had one of the small versions of the kit, and it's really what I need right now, is something that can get the absolute smallest adjustment to the carving. This is not it. Something finer than that. These wolf tools are one of those situations where, I used to think that I couldn't sew well, and I couldn't. I was doing sloppy basic sewing. And then I got a new sewing machine with lots of bells and whistles. And wow, did my sewing improve. I'm still not a master seamstress by any stretch, but the Kate Wolf tools are, you'll be carving, and then you'll use Kate's tools, and you'll really be carving.
Is that something you can sharpen if they get dull?
I don't know the answer to that because I have not, you're working in wax, you're not working on stuff that really dulls things. So I've yet to see a set dull. Now this material is pretty wussy under a steel blade. This stage of the game, I do a little working back and forth, like I'm carving one of my leaves and I notice it's very, very thick still. So I'm going to take some more material away from the back in addition to what I'm carving pattern wise in the front. kingdom for a tiny little tool. Here. This is also a skill set that you'll find different people have their own preferred set of tools. So some might use the dental tools more, some might use heat more or less, or they might use burrs more or less. If I had a full set of waxworking burrs down to really fine detail, I might do that as well to get myself a little bit more of this carve that I'm trying for. Because I'm not happy with the size, the scale of any of my tools right now. My leaves are looking a little bit more like chunks of berries because I'm working so coarsely right now. And on the vine, I think I'm going to try and do a little heat texturing. So I'm going to use a ball-shaped tip, some heat, and see if I can get an interesting effect just by pressing the heated tool in. It does give me a nice little bark-like effect.
Have you ever cast the wax with a gemstone inside?
I have when I've done Delft clay casting. I've never sent one off to be spin cast with a stone in place. There's only certain stones that you can set and use. It's got to be a diamond or an emerald. I believe that spinel maybe will take it. It needs to be able to take the temperatures, and it needs to have no inclusions or fractures or fills. Like a lot of rubies are filled, glass filled, and those will just craze and crack and change color on you if that's what you send. And then I believe CZs can also be cast in place. So the CZs that I recommended if you want practice on setting faceted stones that Rio sells are good for that as well.
Oh, that's good to know. I have those.
So what I'm doing right now is just sort of using the ball end to add a sort of detail to the vine that I've got running through. You can see the little spikes of plastic standing up off of the piece. We're going to burn those off in a minute.
Have you ever heard of a tool called the wax machine system?
Nope. Not one that's familiar to me.
I have some that want. I have like one that someone gave me, but it's not complete.
Yeah, it might
I'm
be,
trying-
might be able to find parts for it on eBay.
I have that set up,
Do you?
But
You do
it's-
have it?
but it's for doing the wax on the Ukrainian Easter eggs.
Oh, cool.
Is
Okay.
it really?
Yeah, it's a whole system.
Okay, so hopefully you can see I've got some leafy patterns starting to take shape. And then this textured band that I've done with the dots that I was just going through over to the
Mhm.
other leaves that are a little less leafy on this side. They've got better negative space, but worse leaves. Oh, maybe they don't know. This is the side that doesn't have the good negative space. So I'm starting to build in that texture, and to counter that, I want to clean up a lot of the area around it to be much smoother. So it really pops. So I'm gonna now sort of peel down and smooth down the layers that aren't the vine. So they're lower than the rest of it. And then flatten out the framing that I've done a little bit. A little hard to get in there without hitting the design. Thank you.
Is that tool there,
Yeah.
just smoothing it out or taking material away?
Say that again?
That you were just using before this one, was that smoothing it out or taking wax away?
Taking material away. This is a sharp blade. This is what we used for the inside carving out. And I just use it when I'm going around a curve because it's
Okay,
a little larger than the blade of the X-Acto, so it can work a little speedier on certain things. So it's just a first pass of smoothing. I tend to get these little chop lines in if I'm using the X-Acto. And that problem spot is still proving to be a little problematic, the one that I had the bubble in. I still haven't quite gotten it filled. I carved down a bit. This is a reason that I will almost always make a mold instead of just going to a straight casting, because you can't ever quite be sure you've gotten all your bubbles out. And I definitely still have a bubble here. Solidify while I work on other areas.
So you make a mold of the wax before you cast it, so then you can repair the shot wax.
Yeah, what actually happens when you make a mold is that you, especially if it's production molding, is that they will then use what's called injection wax. So they make the mold off of your carving, then they pull your carving out of that mold, and they use the frame, the empty mold they've created, and they shoot it through with high pressure wax, so that it's all one piece of wax instead of the carving and the potential bubbles that we've done. And then it's cast off of that. So that's sprued, which is adding the little spots that the wax can flow down. And it's often put in a sprue tree with a lot of other sprued pieces. And then that whole sprue tree gets put into what's called investment, which is basically a fancy kind of plaster that closely binds around all the waxes. And then they are burned out, the wax gets burned out, so that what it leaves behind is a hollow, the shape of the tree full of castings. And that tree is usually done upside down with all the points pointing down, or it might be out at the end of the casting, the spinneret that they put it in. And there's spin casting, there's pressure, vacuum casting, there's a bunch of different ways, but the gist of it is you try to get the material from the widest point down to the narrowest point, either through centrifugal force from the spin casting or through the vacuum casting, drawing it down. And there's usually air vents that are put into the mold, into the investment layer, that let the air that gets trapped when they're pushing the metal in to make its way out. I pay the pros who know what they're doing to sprue my waxes. So I don't, unless I have a very specific place I don't want something or I do want something to be sprued, I let them decide. And if a caster doesn't have the sense to avoid all my decorative spots, then I don't use them again.
Yeah, I would think that would be a hard call, right? I mean,
Right.
decorative art, you spend so much time detailing.
Yeah, but sometimes you've made a design that is so hard to sprue in order to get metal to places, like you can't do things that have too much fine detail out in the end, or you have something that has a cutback, which is really, really hard to cast cleanly. Because metal doesn't want to go back uphill once it starts downhill. And so they may have to put extra sprues in order to take care of that. And that might be smack dab in the middle of your design, but hopefully they've discussed it with you first. What I'm working on now is sort of adjusting the shape of the band itself, because I'm realizing I've sort of committed to having something that goes a little wonky and wavy. So I'm going to embrace it to follow the vine a little bit more. Because a little bit off is going to really show to the eye as an error, whereas an intentionally off does not. You've got it extreme enough that it is a clear design decision. Then it doesn't give the eye or the hindbrain as looking at something a challenge. So what I'm doing now is crafting that intentional set of curves and winding around the vines, which I think makes it much more interesting of a piece. But that's because that's my aesthetic. Again, not having it all be symmetrical. Of course, the more that I do that to the sides, the more I'm disliking my flat, clean, untouched lines on the outer walls.
Can't see you.
Oh, sorry, am I zoomed in too close? Let me zoom back out. So my problem spot is still proving to be problematic. I keep thinking I've gotten below the bubble, and then more bubble shows up. So let's do a quick flame cleanup for a moment. And then you guys can see design wise where we're headed. Got to be careful with the cleanup with the flame that you're not melting out pattern you've intentionally built in there. So see how I've been taking that band and sort of integrating the vininess into it more than I was. Remember, this started life as a pretty straight band. And now it's making more flow of the vine at the top. Same thing on the other side. Right, so we're getting more of a natural piece. And now this really stands out as being very counter to the rest of the design. It looks like I forgot about it. So I may have to do some carving in here just to get something interesting, or I may just take some material away and make some negative space. I think I'll try that route. I'm going to go with something carved out rather than something additive. How are we doing for time? What are we at? So I can get lost in the hours at this point. 6:30, okay. Not going to do too much more before we finish cleaning it up.
Did you zoom out a drop?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. So what I'm looking for here is just to make some not fully negative space, but some element that takes away material on the sides, gives us something to counter the rest of the piece, making it less weighty on the sides.
So I heard Miss Francesca Watson got a great gift from you.
She got a great gift from what?
From you.
Oh yeah, I did send her some tools.
She said it almost made her cry.
Well, I figure that the more people that can learn from a set of tools, the better. What better thing than to make sure that John's tools get perpetually used? She got a combination of not only stuff that John had used, but a few other people and metalsmiths through the years.
Very thoughtful gift.
The bench pin that I sent her is the pin from John that I used on opening day of the Cogswell project. I figured it would sort of set us off right. It's just not the bench pin that I'm accustomed to, so I only did that first day with it, and it found a better home with her now.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about your process, like when you teach the class? Because it's coming up, May.
When I teach the waxworking class,
Like when you teach I signed up for the Hollow Form.
oh,
it's
yeah.
like the whole weekend. So what's the process? How do you?
Yeah,
teach
it's pretty
class?
intense. We are on camera.
It's very intense.
We're on camera for almost all of it. I mean, obviously you guys can take breaks as needed. But it is actually me doing demos, a lot like what I do here, just writ large, meaning I have sort of a series of exercises that I show you, where I work a step or two ahead of what you'll work on the exercise. And we do the 4 T's, which it's been a while, so I'm going to forget what my own 4 T's are, but it's talk, teach, try it, and then touch base. There we go. I got all 4 of them. So that means that the talk part is me talking through some of the things that we're looking for, the attributes of the material we're working with, that sort of thing, and sort of telling you the steps that we're going to go through. The teach is then me demoing those steps up to a certain point. Because I'm a student who likes to have a goal ahead of me and not be counting on waiting for the teacher to tell me the next steps. Like, I don't have to do those next steps until the teacher is ready for us to, but I need to understand my end point of why I'm doing something in order for it to really click. So I like to talk it through, then show a piece of it. And then you guys go back to your benches and try it while I stay on and give advice if people have questions. So you pop up and say, hey, Rachel, I have this problem I'm running into. How do I solve for it? And if it's a problem that I think other people might be interested in, I ask them to all come back to camera. And then or I hold it for one of our touch base sessions where it's people coming back and showing what progress they've made. If they're comfortable doing so, you don't have to show things. And then we do that like 3 to 5 cycles a day, with the demos and talking phases ranging from half an hour to sometimes as much as an hour. I try to keep it not much longer than that, but sometimes, you know me, I like to talk. So it's doing that kind of cycle. And so you're working at your own bench and basically doing as much as you want to on any given sample or demo, or working, the yesterday's stuff if you didn't get as far as you wanted to. And then the theory is that I've given you enough that when you go home and start really working, or you stay in your own studio, you can really start cleaning up what you've done and expanding on it. Sometimes people get entire projects done. Sometimes they just sort of get to I'm ready to polish and finish this. Depends on the class. In the class one, I try to make people be prepared to make a few clasps that they can then add to projects later. So that goal isn't to, make a necklace and set a clasp to it. But if you come into it and say, hey, I have this necklace, I'm trying to figure out what clasp I want to use for it, then I absolutely help you get there. Okay, so that wasn't a super fancy design, but I think it will come back here this way. It at least breaks it up a little bit on the sides to have a little carved away like that. So now I've got carving all the way around. I feel a little better about that. And we still have enough meat up at the top to really set the stone the way that this technique is designed to set it. So I'm not going to be damaging the ring when I go to set it. So now I'm going to, again, I would spend hours more finessing this design. This is even coarse for my preferred level of coarseness. But what I'm going to do now is pretend that I have carved it to my heart's content. Oh, first I'm going to show it off with the stone in there so you can see how it's going to look all funky with the stone in place. And we'll probably cast this in silver because I hate other metals and can't afford gold. And then, so I'm going to do a little bit of touch-up sanding with some of the fine, but there's not really a fineness grit in this to try and flatten some of my edges a little bit and my top a little bit. Just want to be really, really careful at this stage not to go too far. So this is really touch-up work at this point because I've got a little bit of bobble right along there. I'd like to get that a little smoother. Make sure I'm well capped for when we're doing our stone setting. And this sandpaper, every once in a while, you just kind of have to shake it out to clear the little slots. The other thing about sanding is that the dust from the sandpaper gets in to any cracks and stuff that you have. So it really shows you where you've got problem areas. So this action that I'm doing is just to try and follow the curve a little bit and clean that side up a little. These actions aren't much different than I would be doing if this were a metal piece that I were finishing on traditional sandpaper. It's just, I don't have the option to go to 1,000 micron or whatever. It's all coarse level sanding. So what I'm doing here, you can see where it's white is where whiter is where I've been sanding, and any place that I've still got lumps I haven't been able to hit because it's at a lower down segment of the ring. So I'm trying to sort of even that out, just like I might if I were using, say, Sharpie mark on my traditional metal work to tell me where the low spots were. The sanding layer tells me that if I pay attention to it.
So do you think you got those valleys because of squeezing the wax with your fingers?
No, definitely not. This hard wax is plastic. I couldn't put a dent in it with my fingers if I tried. I would snap it before it would get a divot. So I think that was me because I was doing hand carving. My blade dipped lower or cut away more in one spot than in another. And so now what I'm doing is finding those on my surface and trying to clean them up a bit. This also takes down the last of my dug in coordinate marks that I put down at the beginning. Remember, I still had my little center lines going on. So you always want to account for this amount of final touch up that you're going to do if you know you're going to have to get rid of those marks. And when I'm doing bulk grinding, I will tend to go sort of what I call crazy legs, which is squiggling all over. For this, I'm doing more precise curves and lines that are following the wax. So I'm trying not to add marks back in as I do this. And I've got a little bit of scuff inside of my bezel that I want to take out. Good old trusty square-sided. And I'm also going to do another run around the inside just to clean that up. I did poke through when I was carving my negative space. I'm checking for things like the inner curve underneath the ring to make sure that it's really smoothed out so that it's comfortable. I could always do further sanding and drilling, and burr work and so on when I get it back from casting, but the more I can do before I get to casting, the less work I have to do to finish it up. Polish that up, heat polish that. See how that starts to look. The heat polishing is always the most nerve-wracking for me, because you put all this time into it. And if it then over melts, it creates a problem for you. But it also is the thing that gives it a nice smooth cast at the end. So there we're starting to look like we've got a nice surface. Nice, smooth, even. Now I got to do similarly to my sides. This gets a little hairier because I put down texture. And I may discover that even in that melt, I'm not getting as clean a surface as I want. So I may have to go back in with tools a little bit and just smooth it out, either heated or otherwise, to give myself a final finish on the insides of the carvings. What I am again looking for is all the marks, the unintentional marks are gone, and only my intentional texturing is what's left, because every little bit will show up in the casting. Got to be careful that it doesn't get drippy soft. We just want to get it glossy soft. And again, if you touch the semi-liquid state, you're going to put your fingerprints in it. So you got to be careful of that. Because in this state, it's kind of like soft hot glue. It's easy to touch down on it. I'm going to pause there, check for any areas I want to get a little cleaner. I think that's sort of where I want to be without overwork, a little bit there, without overworking it too much. And I'm going to let this cool for a moment, because then the last thing I'm going to do is use my grandmother's silk stockings on it and see how it looks. So while I'm letting that cool a little bit, so it's nice and solid again, any questions about what we've gone through today and the tools we've used?
Yeah, how did you keep grandma's silk stockings? Oh my God, is that a blast from the past?
So my family packed up a lot of gear from my West Coast relatives when we were back on the East Coast, including my sister is in theater and she's a costumer. But I happened to have the house that the whole load of furniture and clothing could be delivered to. So I got first pick. Not that I fit into anything of my grandmother's. So yeah, but it was nice to be able to pull those, knowing that they weren't going to be usable for anybody to wear because they were so stretched out and distorted. And frankly, they would just tear easily at that number of years. But yeah, it was fun to get that. I got that and a really nice dining room table, some side tables. And my sister got most of the costumes because she's in theater and does the costuming work for things. Leanne is asking me to say how much shrinkage I anticipate on the top gemstone fitting. So this one is a challenge to answer because there are a lot of factors. The factors that go into wax shrinkage include, is it molded? And what type of mold material is used. There is one of the best things that technology has progressed in recent years is improving the material's shrinkage rate. Used to be that you had to count on like up to 15% shrinkage because of the rubberized molds, but now there's a lot more silicone molds and other things. Go with what they'll say it's no shrinkage, but everything has a tiny bit of shrinkage because the metal has to fill the gap and then cool. So there's that level of molecular shrinkage, and so it depends on whether you're paying for the best molds and the best casting, or whether you're using some of the older materials. The other thing that influences it is which type of metal. There's different shrinkage rates for different metals. A good casting house is going to know that stuff inside and out. The other thing to remember is that there is porosity that happens when you're casting, no matter what. The more you can avoid the bubbles and so on, and therefore why I recommend molding even single casts, the better, because you will get you'll get a lot better results if they do an investment single cast instead of your original cast. But no matter what, your work comes back to you 100% annealed, right? So that can be an issue. Something that is cast can be more fragile than the same object if you made it in fabrication, because in the course of fabricating, you might have work hardened it. So there are heat hardening techniques, and I could not quote you the exact temperature, but it's something like keep it in a 140-degree oven for 2 hours, kind of like you're literally baking it in a regular oven to heat harden sterling. There are articles on it. I've never needed to do it. I've never ended up doing it, but sometimes if you're doing delicate castings, you may want to heat harden it afterwards, or work harden it by sizing it up, or something that puts the same kind of things that would harden it after that, if you were doing it in fabricated form. So the shrinkage specifically to what I've designed for the stone is I've actually made it a fairly snug fit because I can always carve more away. I can't easily put material in. So Leanne, in this case, my ring fits, my stone fits fairly snugly, as long as I didn't melt too much away, and solidly. Oops, I'm not on that camera anymore, so you guys won't see what I'm doing. So it fits fairly snugly right in there, right? Because we're going to be pushing down from above around it. So that is, even if this shrinks in casting, that's okay, because worst case is I take a barrel burr and I carve out some more material. But if it's too loose before I go to cast, then it's problematic.
And what about the ring shank? Does that shrink that too then?
Yeah, it's going to be pretty equal shrinkage. If you're getting shrinkage, you're getting it all the way around, and it's going to be pretty equal. But again, that's so when I size rings on somebody, when I'm doing wax, I size them not a full half size small. I tend to size them sort of a quarter size small. And then I'm assuming I'm going to do a little bit of stretching and resizing when I get it. Because again, especially if it's an intricately carved thing, it's not easy to size it down, but it is possible to size it up. There are some except whens, like if you're casting your stones in place, you better get that size and shrinkage assumption dead on, because you're not going to want to be sizing it. Yep. So yeah, snug fit, always able to take material away, not able to put material back easily and still keep the integrity of the casting. We would not be getting the goal of this particular project is for us to get that Roman setting, and we'll go from there. Any other questions before I get back to that final touch up with the stockings? Then I shall stocking. I'm going to get my burner out of here so I don't catch things afire while I'm doing this. And this is just a light burnishing. I usually try to get a smooth bit. Oops, I'm not far enough away. A sec. I usually just try to get a smooth bit covered on my finger so that I don't have wrinkles in there because that could introduce things. And I'm burnishing every surface that I can reach. And it'll start to sort of dull down a little bit from that heat treatment that I did on it. But what it does is it acts as a light sandpaper. This is the finest sandpaper that I'm touching to this. And I'm just working the whole piece. And that includes trying to get down into any notches and crevices I've made and getting the last of it smoothed down. It also shows me on close inspection any spots where I still have a little texture. So I might, after this, I might end up going back and doing a little bit of cleanup. That problem spot that is still giving me grief because it's got little nubs in it. There's a little bit on the other side that's got some texture I didn't really intend to have there. So with texture, again, it's once you get to intentional texture, it's a very different place than the oops, I made marks on it. And I've got a couple oops, I made marks on this in addition to what I'm doing. But let's assume that I had fixed those magically in these remaining moments, and that would be ready for me to send out to cast. And I will hope that whoever's casting it for me is going to sprue it somewhere back here. Because I've got pattern all around, I'm going to assume I'm going to have to do some carving back in, either with gravers or with burrs or whatever I can use, because there isn't really a great spot to cast this that won't interrupt the design, right? Because usually a sprue is going to come off of it something like this, here, much thicker than what I've got for a piece this big. Occasionally, if it's really much thicker down here, they'll also put some interior sprues. I never worry about an interior sprue on a ring because all it does is help the metal flow better. And I don't have, unless I have a pattern built in there that I intentionally need to keep, I don't have to worry about it because I'm just going to grind it down. And I will get this cast in silver and we'll bring it back and we'll do the Roman setting with it. Dun, dun, dun. It's a much more interesting ring than it was at the end of last session.
Yes.
It feels more me than it did before. So,
What size is it?
oh, me-ish,
Oh,
probably a 9.
I thought that was my second question. Are you making it for you?
I'm not, this is not something I will ever wear. I mean, that's not true. Now that I've done all this carving on it, I might consider wearing it as a, hey, look at this example of a wax carved ring that I have made. But it's big and clunky for my tastes. I would have more top form, but it'll be a good demo piece to show the Roman setting once we're done with it. And, you know, for my proportions, it's not terrible, but it's comfortable. It's a little, it's probably going to be a little, no, that's about right. I want it to catch a little bit on the finger it's going to be on before I cast it, because then the shrinkage will be there. And I also did, I didn't talk about it as I did it, but I also did comfort fit curves and stuff on the interior. And I made sure that up top, the curve that I was carving out was carved. And I will get my scale out and tell you how many grams it is. And whoever has a conversion in front of them can tell me what it's going to be roughly in silver weight. Remember that you're also going to pay for whatever nub of silver they leave on it. So it's not a perfect science to get that measurement, but let's see. Dun, 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 my cute little scale. It comes with its own tray that I love. Put this on if I haven't run out of batteries. My batteries may be out. I may not be able to do this exercise right now.
So the
Shoot.
weights and measurements on page 180, 198 and 199 wouldn't help you with that?
Oh, did he give us a conversion chart that I forgot about? If he did,
Well,
we
I
could
don't
use-
know.
I haven't looked at the book today, so hang on a sec. What page was it?
198, 199.
in the appendix or something? 198, say?
Yes.
Will you look at that? You know, I never get to the back layers of the book. So it looks like he's just giving us weight conversions overall on 198. He's not giving us the gold conversions. So there's a metal weight to each blend of metal. And so once you have the grams, then you multiply, it's a multiplier. So 31 point whatever grams conversion for the wax, to be whatever the weight of the wax is times 31.7 or whatever the number is equals the silver weight. But when you do gold weight, it's 47. I'm making these numbers up. Don't use these numbers. 47.5 for 14 karat, right? And 18 karat is even more pure gold. So it's going to be 49.3 or whatever the number is. There are charts all over the internet, and it's going to be dependent on the proprietary blend that caster is using. So for example, if their white gold is a non-nickel based versus a nickel based, those two have slightly different weights. All you're getting with those is ballpark. Am I spending $5,000 in metal and gold, or am I spending $3,200 in metal and gold? Because you can take the spot price and say, if it's going to be roughly 15 grams of material at X metal, spot price is Y, and you could do that math to give yourself a ballpark to help your customer. Excuse me, I'm getting the hiccups. But what I don't have is a battery in my scale, so I can't tell what the gram weight of this particular piece of wax is. So we won't know until we get it back what it's going to be, or until I find a battery and I announce it. Any other remaining questions this evening before we go to show and tell? Surely you have all spent your month off making all the prior projects. That's what I'm counting on.
So what is the goal for next time then?
The next time project is going to be the faux channel setting, which is, we're going to take some heavy gauge metal and turn it into a U and channel set in between it. It's a cute little earring design that he has.
Yeah.
And here's my spotlight so I can remove me and see all of you. Come on, little remove. There we go. And then we will probably also get to at least one, if not two, maybe all three of the pearl setting approaches. And I will be having to dig up my pearls because I don't think I have any gem beads. So I'm going to be setting some pearls. Guess I better figure out what I'm going to put those in, because I hate taking pearls off of posts once we get it. This will be using an epoxy. I have somewhere in my many piles of things have the two-part epoxy that he recommends. The one that I personally use is the GS Hypo Cement. It's in a bright orange and gray container. And things that you might want to have if you want to play along at home include square wire, or you want to make some square wire. And some small cutout discs, because we're going to do a disc-based setting as one of those. But essentially, they're really all the same thing. There's a peg and there's a pearl that goes on it. The hardest one is the sturdiest one, which is putting a little shim in a slice in your peg and forcing the pearl down onto it. That's the one that makes other jewelers cry, but also really admire you when they come across it if they're doing repairs, because there's no way to pull that pearl off. Whereas the glue ones, you can get rid of the glue by chemical means, and you can cut stuff and so on. And on the split post pearls, you're actually cutting it off and drilling out the material in order to clear it off the pearl. So that'll be that once, if we get through those, I predict that probably that split one is going to have wait for the subsequent session, at which point we will also do our tension setting. And that will be the end of the book. A year and change later. It's pretty damn impressive. Anybody have anything for show and tell? Please. Wendy, is that you? You got something?
No, I'm just closing my book,
Okay.
setting it by my nightstand.
Okay. Carmen, you got anything for us this time?
I worked on earrings, but not gemstones. I worked
Okay.
on pearls. I was just taking a break because actually of all the different designs that I've made,
Yeah.
I'm trying to get molds made and waxes so that I can continue with them and just add to the waxes like you were saying.
Nice.
So I worked on that and I found the person I think I'm going to work with. I just have to drop it off.
Cool.
So,
You'll have
I
to
needed-
share before and after photos with us.
okay.
Anybody else have anything to show off?
No, but I have an observation or why you were working with the wax. I, was looking through the book and I thought, it might be nice to go through the book and pick out some of those great pieces and kind of analyze them and how they got to that point. What
Yeah.
did they do? What's the process? 'Cause there's
Yeah.
some cool
So the
stuff in there.
photos of other people's work, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a really cool exercise because in part because John tells the story about how the photos that he originally sent to I'm blanking on his name, the guy that publishes the books, who also wrote the wonderful metalsmithing books. So I have half of his books here.
Tim
McCray.
agree?
Thank you, Tim McCray. He said he sent the photos that were supposed to go with the text and he didn't know that they never made it to Tim. So Tim was last minute looking for photos to add to it. And so when they got to him, they got put in the book, not near the sections, but sort of haphazardly throughout the book. So they don't associate to the section they're with. And that's always been a minor frustration of his. If he could republish it, he would do that differently. But yeah, and there's a couple settings that we have photos of that I don't think are covered in the book.
No.
There's some intriguing ones in there. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Or
I mean, as an exercise for the students, you could go through and make notes about what you think they did and then propose those ideas to us all. Everybody take a few photos and sort of look at the ones that are most intriguing to you and see if you can figure out reverse engineering it. But yeah, I'm happy to do that as a sort of, we should probably have like a coffee clatch discussion session once we get past the last of this with what did we learn and what would we have done differently and that sort of thing. So, all right, I'm not hearing any other volunteers with stuff to show me. I'm hoping I see more. I'm sort of in a vacuum here, but I'll see you guys in a couple weeks for
All right.
the next setting.
You're going to
Have
have your
good
show.
shows.
Thank you. Good night, all.
good
All
night.
right. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.